if I told you the US government once stored something in a hidden Roswell tunnel, something that looked alive even though it shouldn't have been, you'd call it clickbait. But the truth is, the man who saw it never lived long enough to finish his report. And tonight, his final recording has surfaced. What you're about to hear isn't a theory, and it isn't another recycled Roswell myth pulled from some dusty UFO forum. It comes from a sealed audio file recorded by a man named Thomas Reaver, retired Air Force technician who worked out of Nevada and New Mexico in the late 90s. The file was discovered by his nephew, hidden inside a damaged cassette deck, wrapped in a piece of military shoe cloth that smelled like machine oil and desert sand. The nephew, who claims he found it only after Thomas passed away, never meant to release it. But when he heard what was on it, he said he didn't sleep for 3 nights because it felt less like a confession and more like a warning. Thomas's voice on the tape starts weak, shaky, like his lungs were already fading. He coughs twice, sighs, and then you hear him say, "If you're listening to this, I'm either gone or I've run out of places to hide. I didn't want this to die with me. Someone needs to know because Roswell wasn't an accident, and those bodies, they weren't from any crash we were told about. They were moved. Deliberately." At first, his nephew thought Thomas meant Roswell, the famous crash of 1947. But Notames said Roswell, not Roswell. A name almost no one recognizes because it wasn't a town or a base or even a project name. It was a code word for a classified containment site buried under a stretch of land between Corona and Lincoln County. According to Thomas, Roswell wasn't built to hide wreckage. It was built to store living biological specimens that didn't come from Earth. He continues on the tape. They weren't dead when they arrived. At least one wasn't. That was the moment the nephew paused the recording, rewound it, and listened again. You can hear Thomas whisper the phrase with this trembling disbelief, like he still couldn't accept what he saw even decades later. One of them wasn't dead. The tape doesn't explain how these beings were captured. It starts from the point where Thomas was flown in under the assumption he would help service environmental control systems for a subterranean lab. He said the orders came from a nameless officer at Nellis with a warning stamped in red, non-disclosure, threat class B. Thomas didn't even know what that classification meant. He assumed chemical hazard, bioweapon, something accidental. When he arrived at the site, he said it took 2 hours off-road. Escorted by men who didn't speak, he noticed the sand had been disturbed for miles, like heavy vehicles passed through but left no tracks. The entrance wasn't obvious. It was a disguised slope leading into the earth, covered by metal panels painted the same color as the desert. When he stepped inside, the temperature dropped instantly. The deeper they went, the more the air smelled like antiseptic and cold metal. The kind of smell you only get in facilities built in a rush, as Thomas describes. The first room he entered looked like a normal medical prep area: stainless steel counters, thick gloves, suits, respirators. But beyond the second door, everything changed. You can hear in his voice the exact moment his memory begins to disturb him. The lighting wasn't white, he says. It was a pale blue, like the kind of light used in aquariums. I thought it was some kind of deacon chamber. But then I saw the glass vaults, 6 of them, each about 12 feet long, frosted from the inside. He stopped speaking for 10 seconds on the tape, breathing hard. It sounds like he struggles to continue. Then he whispers, 5 contained bodies, and 1 contained movement. According to Thomas, these weren't cartoonish aliens or the exaggerated creatures seen in old tabloids. They were slender, maybe 5 feet tall, with elongate limbs and soft, almost translucent skin that shifted in color under the blue lights. Their skulls were smooth, no hair, with a ridge running down the center like a fused seam. The eyes closed at the time were larger than human but not grotesque. Their bodies looked fragile, like something grown rather than born. But the sixth vault, that's the one Thomas recorded the longest description of. He said it wasn't fully sealed. The frost on its glass was thinner, like the temperature had recently changed. Inside, the being's chest rose and fell, slow but unmistakably alive. A vital sign monitor flickered with a faint hum. 2 tubes were attached to the creature's sides, feeding something into it, or extracting something out. Thomas said what terrified him wasn't that the being was alive, but that it seemed aware as he approached the glass. He said its eyelids twitched. Its head moved slightly, like it sensed motion beyond the vault, and then its eyes opened. He describes them as entirely black, glossy, like polished stone. Not threatening, but ancient, intelligent, calculating. Thomas froze. The escorts behind him raised their weapons immediately, but the being didn't move aggressively. It simply stared, unblinking, and then, according to the tape, it spoke, not with its mouth. Thomas said its jaw never shifted, but something pressed into his mind. A feeling, a soundless word. Cold, that single word. Cold. He stepped back. The guards looked at him strangely, like they knew something but weren't surprised. He asked them, "Did you hear that?" They didn't answer. Instead, one of them reached to a console and lowered the temperature inside the vault. When Thomas protested, saying the creature looked in pain, the guard told him, "It stays sedated. If it wakes up completely, containment won't hold." Thomas didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. His job was simple: look at the environmental regulators and recalibrate them for long-term stability. But the deeper he went into the system, the more anomalies he found. Temperatures were fluctuating without manual input. Internal pressure readings reset by themselves, and power spikes traced back to no identifiable source. Something inside that vault, something biological, was interfering with the equipment. The next portion of the tape is where Thomas's voice gets shaky, almost whispering. He says the creature didn't just sense people nearby, sensed emotions, thoughts, fears. He felt it reading him, searching for something. He said the word cold wasn't about the temperature. It was about loneliness, isolation, abandonment, like the being was trying to communicate something deeper, but was too sedated to push the message through. When Thomas asked his supervisor, an officer named Hale, about the bodies, Hale told him they weren't from the Roswell crash. They were recovered over multiple decades from different parts of the world. Some found buried in ice, some in deserts, some in places where there were no witnesses, and no explanation for how they appeared. But one thing was consistent: they weren't dead when discovered. They died after containment. Thomas believed something was killing them, slowly, deliberately, and he didn't think it was human negligence. He thought the environment was wrong for them, or that they were being intentionally kept weak. Why? He never got a straight answer, but the tape reveals something shocking. Hale wasn't military originally. He was a private contractor working under an unnamed defense firm. His badge looked military, but Thomas noticed the insignia was slightly off, like someone tried to copy it, but didn't understand its symbolism. Hale monitored everything Thomas did, every setting he changed, every circuit he touched, and after the second night at Roswell, Thomas woke up in his temporary bunk to find Hale sitting beside him in the dark. No lights, no noise, just Hale and the faint hum of air filtration. Hale said, "You saw too much today." Thomas asked, "What do you mean?" Hale stared at him for a long moment before saying, "The one in the 6th vault responded to you." Thomas said he didn't know what that meant. Hale leaned in and whispered, "They don't respond to humans. They don't even recognize us. But it recognized you. That's the problem." Thomas claimed Hale ordered him to report for a neurological assessment at 0600 the next morning. Not a physical neurological. He thought Hale wanted to determine whether the being implanted something in him. A thought. A link. A signal. Terrified, Thomas planned to refuse the exam. But when he entered the 6th chamber again to finish his work before leaving, the creature's eyes opened wider. This time, it pressed another word into his mind. Leave. Just that. Leave. He stepped closer, and for the first time, he saw condensation forming on the inside of the glass, not from cold, but from heat. The creature's body temperature was rising, unnaturally fast. The tubes began to vibrate slightly, and the lights flickered. Thomas grabbed a handheld scanner and pointed it at the vault. The readings were off-the-charts electromagnetic spikes, neural pulses, and thermal energy all increasing rapidly. Suddenly, alarms blared. Guards stormed in. Hale shouted for the vault to be sealed permanently, to increase sedation, to drop the temperature to lethal levels if necessary. And Thomas realized what was happening. Hale didn't want to control the being. He wanted to kill it, because it was waking up more each day, learning, adapting, communicating. But Thomas said the being didn't react with fear. Instead, it looked at him, and he heard one final phrase in his mind. Not ours, yours. Before he could process the meaning, the guards forced him out, slammed the chamber shut, and sealed the room. Hale ordered Thomas to begin immediate memory evaluation the next morning, but Thomas pretended to comply. That night, he gathered his belongings, stole a transport manifest, and escaped the facility in a supply truck heading back toward Highway 380. He never returned to the Air Force. He claimed he never slept through a full night again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that being staring back at him, its black eyes reflecting fear, not for itself, but for humanity. Near the end of the tape, Thomas says something that the nephew later described as the sentence that ruined his sleep permanently. Roswell wasn't a storage site. It was a warning bunker. Those bodies weren't specimens, they were messengers. And the one that lived, it wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to tell us something was coming. Something that wasn't them. Thomas believed that the beings weren't invaders. They were refugees, hiding, escaping from something larger, more dangerous, more intelligent than anything humans had imagined. And Roswell was never about studying them. It was about containing the message they carried. He ends the tape with his voice barely audible. If they were running, what were they running from? And why are we the ones keeping their last surviving witness locked underground? The nephew, after hearing that last line, destroyed the cassette player but saved the tape. He tried to contact multiple researchers anonymously. No one responded except one independent journalist from Arizona, who claimed he'd heard rumors of a 6th vault years before. When the nephew sent him a digital copy, the journalist vanished. No posts, no messages, no traces online. The last part of the tape contains a strange background sound like a faint hum, almost rhythmic. Audio analysts who were shown the clip anonymously claimed it wasn't machinery. It resembled a biological pulse, slow, heavy, but not human. It only appears during the moments when Thomas describes the living being, as if the recording captured something no one realized was in the room with him to this day. No official documents mention Roswell. No maps show the facility. No satellite images reveal any tampered land between Corona and Lincoln County. But locals have reported strange vibrations in the ground, late-at-night vibrations that repeat in perfect intervals, like a heartbeat deep below the desert. Some say it's just geological shifting. Others think it's leftover machinery from abandoned projects. But a few, a very small few, believe the sixth vault was never shut down, that the being inside survived, and that whatever message it tried to deliver before sedation took it is still unfinished. So, if you ever find yourself driving the lonely stretch of New Mexico desert south of Corona where the air feels colder than it should, and the ground seems to hum beneath your feet, remember Thomas's final words. Because he didn't record them for himself. He recorded them for whoever would listen next. They weren't running from us. They were running toward us, because whatever was chasing them is still out there.